of Esther. But in order to go to chapter 2, I want to first take out a few moments and look back at the Sefer Ezra. You know, we don't learn Ezra. When we go to yeshiva, elementary school, they teach us Chumash, and in 7th and 8th grade, they start, maybe 6th grade, they start teaching us Joshua, Yehoshua, Shmuel, Aleph and Bet, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and Malachim, Aleph and Bet, 1st and 2nd Kings. So that by the time we finish 8th grade and go to high school, yeshiva high school, we know the book of Joshua. The sun stood still. He took over Jericho, and he won the battle of Ai, the death of Achan, the battle of Givon, the splitting up of Eretz Israel among the tribes. And then we go into Shoftim. We learn all the stories about everyone from Ehud to Gidon, Yiftach, Devorah, Shimshon, the tragedies of what happened with tribe of Binyamin and the idol of Micha. And then we go into Malachim, where Shmuel's, 1st Samuel, and the rise of King Saul, Shaul. Eventually, he's succeeded by David HaMelech in 2nd Samuel, Shmuel Bet. And then in 1st Malachim, we go to Shlomo mostly. And by the end of 1st Malachim, we're smack in the middle of a civil war. We've divided into 2 countries, and the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, the southern kingdom of Binyamin, Yehuda, and Levi. And that's most of Malachim Bet till the destruction. We then start 9th grade yeshiva high school. And in 9th grade yeshiva high school, they take us right into Gemara. It's actually a criticism, internal among rabbis. It's been going on for 20 years to 30 years in the United States. It's an internal discussion about yeshiva high school education. The traditional yeshiva high school education is that it is assumed that now that you've entered 9th grade yeshiva high school, we're not talking, by the way, about a reform high school like TVT here in Orange County or Stephen Wise up in Mulholland Drive. We're not talking about a conservative high school like some of the Solomon Schechters. But in Orthodox, the assumption is the boys have learned, boys and girls are separated. And the boys by now have learned everything they need to know in the basic Tanakh, and they're going to learn only Gemara. And what happens is you show up in yeshiva every day about 8 a.m. or 7:30, and you daven shachris. Everybody davens together in minyan. And since you're not supposed to eat before morning davening, so they have to feed you breakfast. So they feed you breakfast, and then they send you into class. And you're in class from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., 4 hours of Gemara. And it's one subject. This is kind of an insight. Many of you, probably everyone here, with maybe one exception, maybe not, has never been to a yeshiva high school. So I was telling Denise some stories over Shabbos. So it occurred to me, none of you maybe has heard this. So it's just worth 5 minutes to just get the background. From 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. for 4 hours every day, you have Gemara. To sit for a 4-hour class, so what's done is it's broken into 3 parts: Hachana, Shir, and Chazara. Hachana is you prepare the Gemara. You're assigned a chavrusa, you're assigned a study partner. In later years, it's 1 study partner. Often in high school, it's 2 to 4 study partners. And you sit with the Gemara from 9 to 10:30 for an hour and a half, trying to figure out what in the world it's saying, because it's Aramaic. So you have to use Rashi. They don't let you bring in the English. And so you have to use Rashi. And even with Rashi's commentary, it's almost impossible for kids like us. If you come from a good yeshivish background, you have a fighting chance. But kids like us from American families, even Orthodox, we don't know what the heck is flying. So the Rebbe walks around the room for 2 purposes: to be available as a resource, to say, Rebbe, I don't understand this word, this sentence, and he's there to explain it. And he's there to monitor, because when you put 4 9th grade boys, 14-year-old together, and trust them to spend an hour and a half preparing Gemara, not. So we would spend an hour and a half talking about the Yankees and Mets. except when the Rebbe would come in our side of the room, and suddenly everybody would become very like Tevye with a rabbi's eyes. So, and then what would happen is, so we would have recess for 15 minutes from 10:30 to 10:45, 10:50, and then you come and you have shiur. And shiur would be an hour. The Rebbe would talk from about 10:45 till 11:30. He's supposed to go till 12, but he would see he loses us at 11:30. And then at 11:30, you have chazar, where the same four guys are supposed to spend the next hour and a half till 1 talking about what we learned in the Gemara from the Rebbe. So we had prepared for an hour and a half. We had a 45-minute class, and then we're supposed to review it for an hour and a half. Now that we know what the words mean, the idea is the Rebbe added all this extra insight and extra commentary from the Ba'alei HaTosfot, the commentators who are the grandchildren of Rashi. And that's 4 days a week. That was Monday to Thursday. On Friday, and then, at 1 o'clock, we'd have lunch till 1:30, and then we would have English class, namely secular studies till 6:30, 5 hours daily of secular studies. And then at 6:30, the day ended. So you were in yeshiva from 7:30 a.m. till 6:30 p.m., 11 hours a day, 4 days a week. And then on Friday, we had half a day, only Gemara, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And there would be early dismissal at 1 to go home for Shabbos. And then on Sunday, we had 5 hours of class. Every Sunday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., we had secular studies. So that's where we got that 5th day. So we were in school 6 days a week. And on 2 p.m., we'd get home in time to catch the second half of the football games or the baseball games, unless you cut school on Sunday to go to a baseball game. And the Rebbe's kept a record of who's not showing up. They were very strict if you didn't show up on Sunday. So we went to school 6 days a week. And there were many people who did not send their kids to yeshiva, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, because they wanted their kids to end up in a good college and figured if I send my kid to yeshiva, he won't get a good education. And in fact, anyone who went to a yeshiva got exactly the education he wanted. So I went to Columbia University, as did certain classmates like Aaron Stein, Phil Roth. We had a Philip Roth also, not the writer. He became a doctor. Aaron Stein. I was the only disappointment among them. I'm the only one who did not become a doctor. And then others went to Brooklyn College, which is equivalent to a good local, not better than a community college. It's like a Cal State, or it's like the State University of New York. And then some went to Yeshiva University, Yeshiva College, to continue the same schedule. And that's what Yeshiva was. And because it was an all-boys school, sometimes we got a little bit misbehaved. So I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch of stories, just to give you one story, just one example, so that you'll have an idea of what goes on. Now, there are other yeshivas like the Mir Yeshiva. That's the yeshiva. That's yeshivish. Those boys are the boys. That's what was contemplated in the 1700s. That's what the Vilna Gaon would have wanted out of the boys. We, on the other hand, were BTA, the Brooklyn Talmudical Academy. What can I tell you? So just one example, I could go on, and I did Friday night, but one example was we had this kid Kramer. I won't mention his first name. And Kramer was like a misbehaved boy. He did not last past the first year. He was missing. He's never seen again. One of Kramer's stunts, we had a very nervous Rebbe in 9th grade. He was the most nervous guy. He used to smoke 2 cigarettes at once. He'd start smoking. After 15 minutes in class, he'd pop a second cigarette and he just couldn't take it. So he was very nervous. So Kramer decided he's not nervous enough. So one day we were on the 2nd floor. The room always, you kept the windows closed so you wouldn't hear the traffic outside. And you kept the Venetian blinds closed so you wouldn't see what you don't hear. One day Kramer arranged for the window to be open and for the Venetian blinds to be open. And he sneaked up to the 3rd floor, the floor right above our classroom, where he opened that window too. And he started screaming and yelling out the window, I can't take this place anymore. I can't take this place. I'm going to jump. And he had brought up with him a mannequin that he had managed to get his hands on. And so after he was sure that he had the Rebbe's attention, because there were two people in the class on the second floor who had been pre-assigned to scream out the window, don't jump, don't jump. And that would be Kramer's signal that the Rebbe heard him. And so at the assigned moment, Kramer dropped the mannequin. The Rebbe, of course, saw the mannequin flying down. You don't really pause to analyze what's just flown down, but the Rebbe we didn't have an elevator, so the Rebbe decides he's going to run from the second floor down to the first floor and catch Kramer before he dies. So anyway, that was sort of the kinds of things that used to go on at yeshiva. Welcome to our yeshiva here, and we're back. So we never learned any of the Navi beyond Melachim Bet. So the books of Daniel and Ezra, and Esther we knew from Purim, Ruth we knew from Shavuot, but we didn't know these other books, and therefore many congregational rabbis don't teach it because they've never studied it, or they eventually study it privately on their own, as of course I've done several times. But it's a reason a lot of us don't know it. Now, we're not going to go completely through it sentence by sentence, but as we get into the second chapter here of Megillah, it is really important to have, I've already given you an overview, but to refresh a little bit, I'm not going to go sentence by sentence. I'm going to fly through. To remind you, we were exiled by Babylonia and King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar had a son, Evil Merodach. Evil Merodach did not last long, and he was followed by Belshazzar. And we've studied this. Belshazzar, in chapter 5 of the book of Daniel, held a celebration the third year of his monarchy, and at the celebration, they they included all the vessels from the Beit HaMikdash that the grandfather, according to those who say that there's a discussion, was Belshazzar the son of Evil Merodach, or was he the brother? If you say he's the son, that makes him the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. If you say he was the brother, that makes him the son. Regardless, the family still had the jewels and the vessels they had taken from the Beit HaMikdash. And he used it. He took that out for the night of the celebration, and he personally drank from the silver chalice from the Beit HaMikdash, and that's when there was the writing on the wall. That night he died. And we've studied that already, because he had to remember that the chalice with the palace did not have the brew that was true. So anyway, after he died, the family of Nebuchadnezzar lost the dynasty, and Koresh, or Cyrus of Persia, became the new king. Persia took the empire from Babylonia. And then after the death of Cyrus, you have Darius the First of Media. And the empire starts being shared kind of by Media and by Persia. And then after Darius, now under Koresh, Cyrus, Jews are allowed to return to Eretz Yisrael and to start rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash that the Babylonians destroyed. However, the non-Jews living in Samaria, the Samaritans, the Shomronim, who had been imported there by the Assyrians, Ashur, who had driven out the 10 tribes. So Ashur, or Assyria, not to be confused with Syria, which was Aram. But Ashur drove out the 10 tribes and supplanted them, even as they divided the 10 tribes among their empire, so that the Jews would get lost, the lost 10 tribes, and would not be able to reconstitute. They took people from throughout the empire and brought them into the open area of Shomron, Samaria. These are the Samaritans. And the Samaritans had their own interests. And when they saw Jews coming years later by permission of Cyrus, they communicated to Cyrus, this is a bad idea letting the Jews rebuild. because they will become independent and will break off from your kingdom. And eventually Cyrus slows down the building. Darius II, as I said first, of Media follows, and then is Achashverosh. And Achashverosh, under the influence of Vashti and Haman and the sons of Haman, clamps down no building. There will be no building of the Beit HaMikdash throughout the entire reign of Achashverosh. After he dies, his son, with Esther, which means actually a Jewish king, Darius II of Persia, permits the rebuilding to resume. And that's when it gets resumed. Very quickly here. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, Jeremiah's prophecy was fulfilled. And he issued a proclamation as follows: "Thus says the king of Persia, Cyrus, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea, Yehudah." And you'll ask, did God speak to Cyrus? Apparently so. And we have, in the course of history, encountered certain friends among kings. It's very rare, but those who, for their own reasons, have supported the building of a Beit HaMikdash or other Jewish presence in Jerusalem. The Gemara tells us, I won't take out the time for that, he insisted that the Beit HaMikdash be built with wood and that it not be, he wanted it built with flammable materials so that if he changed his mind, he could burn it down. It does not say it in the text of the book of Ezra, but it's in the Talmud, that he wanted flammable materials to reserve the option, if he was making a mistake, to have the Beit HaMikdash burned. Mi bochem mikol amo, yehi elokavimo. From among you Jews and others from any nation, may you all have your gods. V'ya'ali Yerushalayim asher b'Yehudah, v'yivenet beis Hashem Elokei Yisrael, hu ha'Elokim asher b'Yerushalayim. Cyrus did not particularly have a predisposition towards the Jewish religion or the God of Israel. He was a polytheist, believed in many gods. And he's saying, I don't care what God you believe in. If for whatever your reasons, you want to be supportive of this historic effort, go to Jerusalem and I'll allow it, and build this house of God to the God in Jerusalem. There's other gods. Now, again, this idea, sometimes for reasons I don't want to get into because it's politics, and we don't do that in Torah shiurim of ours, but people get into causes that are not even their own causes. It's throughout history. Just a quick example, the Spanish Civil War that predated World War II. Franco was a right-wing fascist, and there were communists, and it was like an interesting civil war going on in Spain. And there are a lot of people who went from the United States to be part of the historic battle to overthrow Franco, let's say. And again, I don't even want to touch on it beyond that, just to make the point that a lot of Americans risked their lives, in some cases actually died, fighting in Spain. They felt it was the right cause at the right time. There are a certain number of Christian evangelicals in America who are deeply devoted. Frankly, they would like to see the Jews build a third temple now and hasten the coming of Jesus. Again, I don't want to get into that either. So there you go. V'chol hanishor mikol hamkomot asher hu garsham yinasuu anshe makomot b'chesav zahav u'verchushu v'chema im handava levet elokim asher Yerushalayim. And for those who are comfortable wherever you're living in my kingdom, he says, you don't have to go up to Jerusalem, but make donations. Give silver, gold, crowdfunding. Go ahead and donate. Whatever it is, they're going to need animals for sacrifices. So he was into this full hog. Well, not full hog, but he was into this. Vayakumu Roshei Ha'avot, Lihuda uVinyamin. Now remember, 10 tribes are lost. The history, Yisachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, forget about it. But you have 3 tribes left, Binyamin, Yehuda, and Levi. Binyamin and Yehuda, because of territorial, they're in the south. and Levi because they don't have territory and are based in Yerushalayim to both to do the offerings of the korbanot at the Beit HaMikdash. So that's the basic story. Again, I don't want to take out a lot of time. Vayotziem, Koresh Melch Paras, Yad Mitudar Gizbar, he gave a lot of stuff back. He gave back a certain amount of the vessels. He released the vessels. Now that he's taken over Babylonia, he's the one who's in control of many of the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. And what he did was he did an inventory, and he sent it off, and he sent a lot of it back, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's Cyrus. So we look very kindly on Cyrus. And then they list all these people who were among the leaders whom Nebuchadnezzar had driven into Babylon and who now returned to Jerusalem, each to his own city. And so it lists names that many of us don't know and a few that we do know. The main leader was Zerubbabel. For many Jews, the only time we ever encounter the name Zerubbabel is in the later stanzas of singing Ma'os Tzur on Hanukkah. Let's see, there's Devir Kadsho, Hevi Ani, Vegam Shamlo, Shakatati, Uvano Geis Vihiglani, Kizarim Avadati, Vien Ra'al Nasachti, Kimat She'avarti, Kates Bavel, Zerubbabel, Lekate Shivim No Shahati, the end of Babylonia, under the leadership of Zerubbabel. Okay, so you had Zerubbabel, you had Nehemiah. You may have heard there's a book in the Bible, the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, there's an actor, he passed away 2 years ago, I think, Nehemiah Pearsoff. Nehemiah, you meet somebody whose name is Nehemiah, probably a Jew. Mordechai, wow, that's our guy. And that's why I'm taking out this digression. It's not a digression. It's part of chapter 2. Mordechai is one of the leaders. That is, they don't list every single name. This is not the Mormons of Salt Lake City listing every name of a Jew that they're able to find on Ancestry.com. Rather, what's going on here is it's listing the leaders who came back, and many of them are from Anshe Knesset Hagadola, Anshe Am Yisrael. This is the foundings of Anshe Knesset Hagadola, the men of the Great Assembly. These men are the ones who composed the Shmona Esrei, for example, the Amida. After all, once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, we don't think about it. We've heard about it in the context of the 3 weeks of 17th Tammuz to Tisha B'Av, as well as the Asara B'Tevet. But a lot of us don't stop and think, how did the Jews, for goodness sakes, maintain a theology and a religious identity without the Beit HaMikdash? Because we did not have shuls. And what happened was, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly in Babylonia, composed prayers. And for the first time, we became a people, a prayerful people, a people who davened as part of the thing. Until then, we didn't really daven the same. We recited daily Shema every morning and night and certain brachot. However, the greater davening really was not a shul thing. It was rather going to the Beit HaMikdash, offering sacrifices. Even the davening was structured ultimately to be parallel to the sacrifices. You have the morning Korban Tamid, the daily offering of morning and afternoon, hence the Shacharit and Mincha. It's our tradition that Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham, composed Shacharit and Yitzchak Mincha. And then because the Mincha was offered late in the afternoon, just before sunset, it continued burning into the night so that it continued wafting up to heaven. Consequently, the rabbis added a third prayer, Ma'ariv, which our tradition tells us Yaakov Avinu wrote and composed. And there's also like a little hint, the second letter of each name of our patriarchs is the time of day when the prayer. So Avraham, the second letter is Beis or Bet, it's Boker. That prayer is in the morning. Yitzchak, second letter is Tzadi, it's Tzaharayim, the afternoon. Yaakov, the second letter is Ayin, which is Erev. Okay, so these are the leaders, and they are the men of the Great Assembly, who include Zerubbabel. I just mentioned that we have him in the Mausur. He's the leader. Mordechai, who eventually breaks off from Babylonia and moves on to Persia and becomes the leader of the Jewish community of Persia. He's a descendant of Benjamin and of Yehuda. We've learned that already. And then they list others, the children of this and the children of that, yada, yada, and of course, yada. And so that's the essence of chapter 2. And then after listing all of them, see already into 60 verses and stuff like that, you get names like, you ever meet a Jew named, someone named Tobias? Or how about Tevye, the milkman? Comes from here, Tovia. And so it goes. And then you had Kohanim came, and it lists all of them. And then what happens is that it says in total, 42,000 Jews returned under Cyrus's order from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael. So there are two ways to look at it. Hey, that's great. 42,000 Jews. The other way to look at it is that the overwhelming majority of Jews remained in Babylonia. So, as Rabbi Meir Kahana once put it, Al Naharot Bavel Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu B'Zachrenu et Zion, that the psalm says, by the rivers of Babylonia, there we sat and there we wept as we remembered Zion. And then we stayed in Babylonia. But 42,000 did come back, along with a certain number of singers, male and female singers. You're going to need singers at the Beit HaMikdash. The Levium, 200 of them, they did not sing together. Remember how Miriam sang separately from the men, and they had horses and mules and camels and all that. The last thing I want to bring out from the book of Ezra is the idea that as we're in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, you have, on the one hand, the builders are laying the foundation, okay? And they're starting to recreate and sew. The tailors are making the garments for the priests. And again, we've said that we don't like to translate the word Kohen into priest. But on the other hand, we had our adversaries. Saris from the word Sareh. The adversaries of Yehuda and Binyamin, that they heard that the exiles are coming. Remember, for those of you that know the history, as Jews started from 1897 with the rise of modern day political Zionism. Okay, there was some proto-Zionism, pre-Herzlian Zionism, some in the Orthodox world, Rav Kalisher, some of the others, but some of the philosophers. But Zionism officially becomes like a political movement, 1897, with Herzl at the Basel, B-A-S-L-E, Basel, Switzerland World Zionist Congress. And there begins a mass movement of Chovevei Tzion and others, people from Eastern Europe, primarily Russia, under the Tsar, times of the pogroms, moving to Eretz Yisrael, not necessarily imagining in their lifetimes that they're going to see a country that's independent, but wanting to set up socialist kibbutzim. So they're blending two things. As Jews, we want to get away from the pogromists. And as socialist Marxists, we're beginning to see that Marxism is not playing out in Russia the way Marx thought it would, and that Lenin also thought it would. It's not quite playing out the way they thought. So, but it could if we start fresh. So many Zionist socialists moved to Israel, partly motivated as Jews, not really religious motivation, but with a desire to create a socialist paradise, a utopia of kibbutzim. So in the same way, you had a certain number of Jews moving, and just as would happen back in the times of Koresh and Cyrus, you have the locals getting nervous, too many Jews are moving in. In that time, it would be the Arabs. Now, the Arabs lived there. Herzl had a bit of a misconception. He said something about, the beauty of Zionism is a land without a people for a people without a land. Well, there were Arabs there. So it was not a land without a people. Arabs had been there, and, I've told you many times, Muhammad comes out into the public world around the year 636. But the Arabs their claim is, it gets into politics again, but we have as good and better a claim. We were there 1,000 years before them. And if they want to say, well, whoever's stronger gets it, well, we're stronger and we're more ethical and all that stuff. I don't want to get into too much. Okay. So Zerubbabel was approached by the locals, just as the Arabs did not want Jews moving in to the Middle East, and they pressured Britain ultimately to adopt the white paper that sealed off the harbors at places like Haifa, which is what led, on the one hand, to the Machteret, the underground, trying to smuggle ships in with those horrible stories we've talked about, things that happened with the Patria and the Struma and others. And of course, the movie Exodus, which is like everything all movies based on a true story, which means it's not really true at all, but it's got little bits. There really was a ship, the Exodus, did not have as happy a story as Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. So in the same way that the modern day Arabs pressured England to keep Jews from coming into Eretz Israel, so the old day biblical times Samaritans were pressuring Cyrus, you got to stop this. And what you had was two things going on. On the one hand, you had adversaries wanting to sabotage from within. Let us build with you, since we too worship your God. The Samaritans were polytheists, not as bad as the Romans mythology, the Greek mythology, the Persian mythology, but they believed in more than one God. And on the other hand, so ever since the time of King Chadon, Esar Chadon Melech Ashur, so the Samaritans said, look, we've been offering ever since King Esar Chadon of Ashur, ever since King Esar Chadon of Assyria brought us and repositioned us here in Samaria, Shomron, we have been continuing to offer sacrifices to our God, but also to the God. We believe there's a regional God in Samaria. See, when they came in, Jews the 10 tribes having been evacuated by the same Ashur, animals became prevalent, wild animals. In the absence of human beings representing a danger, lions and tigers and bears. Actually, lions and tigers are for the jungle, bears are the forest, but they became dangerous. And when the Samaritans were placed into that land, many were killed by the wild animals, were terrified. And they started worshiping the God of Israel, feeling this is the God that protects humans in this area. So they said, we'll work with that. We'll work with you. And Ezra and Zerubbabel turned them away. It is not for you and us to build a house. We alone will build it. It would be as though there would be a movement. I'm not saying there should be. I'm not opining on it today. But it would be as though there would be a movement today. There is a movement. But imagine there were a successful movement to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, a third temple. There are those that want to start building yesterday and a year ago and 20 years ago, since 67. There's the Yeshiva Ateret Kohanim in Yerushalayim, where they already have made the garments for the Kohanim to wear when the temple is ready. And part of I started class today telling you what we were doing while we had Kramer dropping mannequins from the third floor to make the Rebbe crazy. There's real yeshivas that are really focused. Ateret Kohanim, part of their curriculum is teaching Kohanim, actually how to offer sacrifices. Actually, if there would be a Beit HaMikdash tomorrow, there will not be any downtime having to train Kohanim. The Kohanim are ready. So anyway, Ezra is saying the equivalent of if today a certain number of Christians would come up from Falwell's Lynchburg, Virginia, or from Hagees, Texas, together with Muslims for whatever reason, or some Druze, I don't know. But if they would come and say to Jews rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, we'd like to be there with you, we'd like a hand in it, the Jews would turn them down respectfully, would accept donations, would be deeply grateful, but would explain, it's our Beit HaMikdash, we got to build it. Okay. So what ended up happening is that even as Zerubbabel undermined their resolve, they decided to sabotage. They bribed ministers in order to thwart the plans all the years of King Koresh until Malchut Daryavesh, until Darius I, king of Persia. Remember, now comes Achashverosh. And at Achashverosh, Katvu Sitna, from the word Satan, Satan, which also means an accuser. That's why Satan is called Satan. It's not like Satan was born to a parents. What are we going to name this cute little kid? Well, how about Satan? That's a nice name. No, that's not how the name comes. Sitna means accuser, accusation. A Satan is an accuser. According to the way we understand it, there is a chief accuser against the soul and the Jews, and that's the Satan. And then there's others on the other side of the aisle. So they wrote a sitna, an accusation that they sent to the kings, to Koresh, to Daryavish, and finally to Achashverosh, about what's going on in Judea, Jerusalem. And in his life of Artaxerxes, which our Gemara says is Achashverosh, it's not an identical name, but you see similarities. Artaxshasta, Achashverosh. Bottom line was, the king issued the order, again, as I said earlier in class today, with influences from Haman, Haman's sons, and Vashti, to stop the building. There was no building of the Beit Mikdash during that time. And so everything was stopped as the words came in to the king from your servants, from the Samaritans, be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us to have reached Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. And this is Aramaic, because again, these are Babylonian sources and others. Yedia leheve malka dihudeya, but you'll notice it's different from the Aramaic that Circassians speak, or that Kurds in modern day Iraq, Turkey speak. It's got lots of Hebrew in it. In the same, so biblical Aramaic and Gemara Aramaic is a little bit like Yiddish, which is mostly German, but a ton of Jewish stuff in it. So if you spoke Yiddish to a German in Germany, they would pick up some of it, but they would get lost because there's too much Jewish stuff in it. On the other hand, there's enough German in it that my first father-in-law from my original wife tells about how he fought under Patton in the Second World War. And whenever Patton got German prisoners of war, Patton had no one who spoke German, and my former father-in-law, because he spoke good Yiddish, was the closest that Patton had to someone who could speak German. So my father-in-law would be called in every time they got a new Nazi war criminal or just a prisoner of war, just a simple POW. And he'd notice say things like, "Vos ist dein Nomen?" and things like that. What's your name? Of course, the way you say in Yiddish, and how are you, would be, "Vos macht's der Yid?" How is a Jew making? So he had to remember when he was talking to German prisoners of war, it wouldn't be like, "Vos ist dein Nomen?" What is your name? "Vos macht der Yid?" But on the other hand, I don't think the expression was "Vos macht der Nazi." So he knew how to say it. Anyway, Aramaic has parts of Hebrew in it. Yedia lehevi lamalka di Yehudeya. You could see, if you know some Hebrew, it is known, Yadua lamelech shel haYehudim, known to the Jew, be it known about the Jews to the king, disliku min levatach, that they initially were permitted to leave your custody. Elina atu Yerushalayim, they did an aliyah to Jerusalem. Kiryata, Muradata, Uviyashta. And Kirya is a city. Kiryat Arba is the city of the four at Hebron. Moradata from Mered, from rebellious. It's a rebellious city. Biashta, Abusha. It's a place that's just an aggravation, etc. So they sent the word, you should know if this city is rebuilt, Bubby, and the walls are completed, they will no longer pay tribute, poll tax, or land tax, and it will harm the kingdom. Since we eat the salt of the palace, we Samaritans being loyal to your throne, and it is not right that we should see you dishonored, and all we care about is not ourselves, but King Achashverosh. We're writing you, go through the records, check out these Jews. You'll see they never stay loyal to foreign empires. So we advise, if the city's rebuilt and its walls are completed, you'll no longer have any portion. You're going to go from 127 provinces to 126. As a result, the king responded, this is very red. I've read it, Meforish Keri Kadamai. I've read your Aramaic letter. Thing is, I'm Persian. I'm not Babylonian. So I've had it translated to, Farsi. And at my order, search is made. We have indeed read through the history books about these people in this place. I don't know what Cyrus is allowed. I don't know what Darius is allowed, but there have been plenty of powerful kings who have ruled here, and they've had efforts, and eventually the Jews, they do rebel. Got to say it. So I am ordering to stop the men. The city is not to be rebuilt until I so order. Take care not to be lax in this matter, or there will be much damage, and that's not good. Finally, once that letter was issued, that's the end of the game. No more building. We had to stop. We tried, and we had to stop. And so that's from the book of Ezra. Coming back to Megillah. Achar hadavarim ha'ela. The way the Megillah is written, these are very powerful. This is a very important literary transition. Achar hadavarim ha'ela. After these things. The way the Megillah is written, sometimes you have a story going on, a narrative. Jews are at the palace, part of the banquet. The king wants Vashti to show up naked. She doesn't want to show up. Stuff coming up later with Haman and Esther and yada yada. Very often, it simply begins as a new paragraph or a new chapter. And it does not say, after what we just narrated, here's the next thing. After this, here's that. Achar hadvarim ha'ela. After these things, this. When it does not say it, that's the natural way of the Megillah story being unloaded and unfolded. However, when one storyline so blends into the next storyline, that it says, Achar hadavarim ha'ela, that is to call to your attention that this is part of the hand of God. That history and narrative is unfolding, not merely, isn't that interesting, but it's to highlight for you, these are connected events as part of God's hidden plan. His plan in this story is that the Jews are going to face the destruction because assimilation has become so rife in Persia that Jews attend a non-kosher banquet invited by the king, convinced they are part and parcel of the Persian Empire. The majority of Jews do not identify as uniquely Am HaNivchar, a particular Jewish soul and identity, and they just feel we're good Persians. And that's why a lot of rabbis are concerned is American Jewry becoming something like this. Nevertheless, the storyline is that God is going to confront the Jews with near destruction, but God has a plan that will unfold, that will save the Jews and will effectively result in the Jews coming back to Judaism and placing into their mindsets that they do not have a permanent place in Persia, so that he's placing the building blocks for more Jews to go to Eretz Israel, and for the king who will rise, the son of Esther, the Jewish king, who will allow the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash and will not be deterred by Samaritans, because he'll know from his mom what's what. And by then, Haman and the sons and Vashti are way past the point of influence. So, achar hadabarim ha'ela, after these things, that is to say, something's going to unfold now with the death of Vashti that is connected with the bigger plan. Kishoch chamat hamelech Achashverosh. Chamat, cham means hot. Chema, the heat, the anger, the rage. The king's rage that had been smoldering against Vashti and what she had done, and as we have learned in previous classes, it's not so much that she didn't show up naked, though that was a very, very big thing, but it was that note that she wrote him that was so incredibly insulting, and that was read in the presence of his 7 top advisors. That note that brought him down all the rungs from being a king, and instead reminding everyone he's just a coarse and brutish stable boy who managed to rise to king, but he never stopped being a stable boy who could not hold his wine or his alcohol. And it made him a laughingstock in his innermost circle. So he was furious. By now, what's been going on, she's dead. And although the story conveys that it's only like a week passing, it's more like 3 or 4 years. It took 3 or 4 years for him really to get over it. And if you have ever in your life, and I hope not, I've had experiences where I was so badly hurt and damaged. Takes a few years. Outsiders says, get over it. Get over it, move on. If it's painful and hurtful enough, sometimes it takes longer than just move on. Nevertheless, time heals all wounds, and most wounds, and you do get over it. But here, how long did it take? Let's see. I'll come back a moment. But it says that he actually does all of this in the 4th year after it all. So it's going to say that Esther becomes the queen, gets picked, and before you know it, it's the 4th year. And, right, so what ends up happening? After 12 months of the beauty contest, when he finally picks Esther to be the queen, it ends up Bishnat Sheva Lamalchuto, the 7th year of his reign. So she becomes the queen in the 7th year of the reign. But when was this banquet? The banquet was in the 3rd year of his reign, Bishnat Shalosh Lamalcho. So the incident takes place on the 187th day. 187th day. There were 180 days of the larger banquet, then a week of the inner banquet. So it's a half year into his 3rd year, and yet he marries her in the 7th year. And it's 1 year of a beauty contest. So the beauty contest starts in the 6th year. So it took 2.5 years for him to get over this. He had to get over several things. Number one, he actually missed Vashti. He felt under the inebriation and the pressure of his cabinet ministers and their advice, led by Haman, whom we've learned was Mamuchan. He had her killed, but he really missed her. And he came to realize more and more. And again, keep in mind, nowadays, you have more things to occupy your loneliness with, if God forbid you're lonely. You have not only books, but you have television, and you have fire sticks, and you have smartphones and texting and email and yada, 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 yada today. Today's big yada yada day. In those days, you had fewer things to be occupied with. You're a king, there's still plenty, but there is private time and you're all alone. So he really missed her very badly. And it was starting to play out. And therefore, his advisors said, you need a new wife. You need company. And they initially suggested betulot. The betula, more often than not, means a virgin, almost always. So, especially in ancient times, the Middle East, there's a special thing about virgins. You may know, or we all know, this thing about how Arab terrorists, they're given this understanding if they blow themselves up for jihad to kill Jews or whatever, that they'll get 72 virgins in heaven. And it's a thing about virgins. Likewise, those of you who studied Mishnayot Ketubot with me know that like there's a higher amount of money in the Ketubah for a virgin who's marrying than for a previously experienced woman like a widow or a divorcee. That there's actually more money that a chatan, a groom pays for the marrying of a virgin, of a betula. Okay, so but then there's good-looking virgins and there's bad-looking virgins. And what the Arab terrorists are going to get is they're going to end up with 72, we often say Virginians. But anyway, they're saying, you're the king, you could take out the most beautiful, tovot mareh. That means beautiful virgins. So you should have some kind of a pekidim. For those of you that know just a little bit of modern day Hebrew, a pakid is like a bureaucrat, a guy that has a government job. So you should appoint a bunch of pekids, pekidim, in all 127 of your provinces, and they should mandate that every good-looking virgin has to leave home and go to Shushan Habira, the capital city. There's a guy named Hege. Hege, he is in charge of the House of Virgins. We don't have that in the United States, the House of Virgins. As I said, Virginia has a legislative house, but there's no House of Virgins. This is Persia thousands of years ago. If you had virgins, namely, let's say orphans who grew up without parents, there had to be custody. Hege was in charge of all virgins, good looking and bad looking. And because he was in charge, he was eunuchized. He was castrated. They're not going to let a guy like that be a Catholic priest in that crowd, okay? Because as they say, what kind of sex do priests have? And the answer is none. Leave it at that. So he's the cerise. A cerise is a eunuch. He's been demailed. He's non-binary. Let's put it at that. So anyway, all the advice is it should be mandatory. No good-looking virgin, if pointed out to one of your people, your pekids, your pekidim, if she says, I don't want to go, she has no choice. You're the king, you can have them killed on the spot in Hodu or Kush. So gather them all together under Hege's authority. It's probably more than Hege can handle. And he'll have his sub-Heges. And you'll pick one, and that'll be your new queen. And maybe she'll never be Vashti. We're not saying she'll be better than Vashti, but at least you'll have someone instead of Vashti. And so he said, good idea. For this pasuk, these new pesukim, now you know why I brought in Ezra today. Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Habira. There was a Jew there. He was a Yehudi. There's a lot of discussion, and I did this last class, so I won't do too much of it now. But there's a question. What does this mean he's a Yehudi? On the one hand, the Hebrew word for a Jew is Yehudi. Each and every one of us are Yehudim. We are Jews. It could mean you're a Jew, or alternatively, depending on context, it could mean you're from the tribe of Yehuda, Judea, Judah. The 12 sons plus Levi, 12 sons of Yaakov with Leah and Zilpah, Rachel, and Bilhah, the 12 sons of the 12 tribes, Shvatim. Yehuda was the fourth son of Leah. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. From Yehuda, there will come the kings. That was Yaakov's deathbed prophecy. A lion shall come out of Yehuda, the staff, the king's staff, he will be like a lion. Okay. So when the 12 tribes came to Eretz Yisrael, one of the tribes did not get land. That was Levi. Again, that's the third son of Leah. Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Levi does not get land. He's a son of Judah, of Leah, and Yehuda is a son of Leah. Yehuda does get land, just misses getting the Beit HaMikdash. He gets instead the land right under it, south, Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, Hebron, etc. And Benjamin, gets adjacent land that just incorporates also Yerushalayim. So the Beit HaMikdash is in Binyamin's portion, and they're next to each other, Binyamin and Yehuda. And Benjamin is the son of Rachel, with whom she died in childbirth. So that way, when the 10 tribes are dispelled from Eretz Yisrael by Assyria, leaving behind only the tribes of Yehuda and Benjamin, the two mothers, Rachel and Leah, both are represented in what was left. It's not as though the entirety of Leah or the entirety of Rachel was lost. We did lose the entirety of Zilpah and Bilhah, the two maidservants. But Benjamin, Yehuda, and Levi, a representation from Rachel and from Leah, are part of us. 90% of those Jews were Yehuda. There were very few Benjamin, and you've learned why in the Tuesday night Navi class, when we learned the last chapters of Sefer Shoftim, chapters 17, 18, and 19, we learned about the near extinction of the tribe of Benjamin. So close did they come to becoming extinct, wiped out by the other tribes for the reasons we learned with the Pelegish of Giva, the concubine, that whole story. They came so close to being wiped out that they almost had no one to marry for a future generation. We learned about that too. So they had to rebuild, and they never reached the same kind of numbers. Why am I telling this now? Because with the remnant that was left from the three tribes, Benjamin and Yehuda and Levi, the odds are like 9-1 that you come from Yehuda. The odds are like very, very small that you're from Benjamin. That's why we're called Yehudim, because the odds are we're probably from Yehuda. If it happens to be handed down to you from your generations that you come from a Kohen or a Levi, and Kohen is a subset of Levium, so you have that. Or maybe you come from Binyamin. But dollars to donuts, you're a Yehudi. You're actually from Judah. And therefore, as a generalization, we call all of the Jews that are left behind Yehudim. If we could actually know for certain who's from Benjamin, we may not have adopted that name, because we already know who's from Levi and Kohen. So if we knew Benjamin, we wouldn't necessarily adopt that. But that's the thing. So the Gemara says, what does it mean? Is it that he's a Jew, or specifically from Judah? Ushamo Mordechai. So they're introducing the same Mordechai that I brought to your attention a little earlier today as having been one of the men of the Great Assembly, one of the Anshe Knesset Agdola, among the leaders of those recounted in Ezra who came back from Babylonia. And he's the son of Yair, the son of Shemi. He's Ish Yamini, which is a way of saying he's a Benjaminite. Binyamin. Binyamini. So he's a Jew or a Judean or from Judah, and he's from Benjamin. So which is it? If it's saying he's a tribal Benjamin, what does that mean? We are religiously what our mother is, unless we convert to Judaism. So that if our mother is non-Jewish, we're non-Jewish. If our mother is Jewish, we're Jewish. And of course, you can convert. What about your father? He hands down your tribe. So if your father's Kohen, you're a Kohen. Your father's a Levi, but not a Kohen, thus you as well. Everyone else is a Israel. It's handed down. So one possibility is to say that his father is the tribe and the mother, but that couldn't be because he's known primarily as a Benjaminite, the son of Benjaminites, Yair, Shimi, and Kish. So the Gemara walk-away, takeaway is Mordechai descends patrilineally from his father as Benjamin, and probably from the mother, as the mother is someone from Yehuda. And that would make sense. Jews intramarrying, intertribal, but intra-Jew to Jew. We have that as early as the Torah, where the sons of Miriam's brother, Aharon, marries into the family of Yehuda. He does not marry a fellow Levite, let's say, but as the son of Amram and Yocheved, he marries the sister of Nachshon ben Aminadab of the tribe of Yehuda. So that's not far-fetched for someone from Levi to marry Yehuda, Binyamin to marry Yehuda. That's wonderful news. Okay, so here's a Jew from Benjamin, probably mother from Yehuda, Asher Hagla Mirushalayim im Hagola, Asher Haglata im Yechanya Melech Yehuda, Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. And that's what we learned earlier today in chapter 2 in Ezra, I believe it was chapter 2, that he's part of the group that was exiled when the king of Israel was exiled by the Babylonians. They were driven to exile. And as I've taught you, when I read Megillah, I switch melodies for these two sentences. That's not my innovation. That's the way it's supposed to be. So I'll be reading something like this. Vanara asher titav b'yanei hamelech timloch tachat vashti vayitav hadavar b'yanei hamelech vayaskein. Did everybody in the shul reads these two sentences? Actually, just pasuk hey, sentence 5, and then I'll read the melody from Eicha, from Lamentations, which is Tisha B'Av and the exile. Ish Yehudi haya b'shikshan habira u'shemo Mordechai ben Yair ben Shemi ben Kish ish Yemini asher hagla mirushalayim im hagola asher haglata im Yechanya Melech Yehuda, Asher Hegla, Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, Vayi Omein et Hadassah, ESTHER Batado, Kien La Ameim, Yanara Yevatoar V'Tov Amar. So anyway, you shift back into the Megillah melody. Okay, brings us to the name Hadassah and Esther. Well, which is it? What's her name? Is her name Hadassah or is her name Esther? Well, you have two names. Most everybody here has a Hebrew name and an English name. I have the English name David and the Hebrew name Dov. Why is it so unusual to have two names, a Hebrew name and a so-called Christian name? So in the same way, that's her pre-Jesus Christian name. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. That's a myrtle. Have you ever heard of a woman named Myrtle? It's not a common name in this generation, but Myrtle is if you look it up, there were myrtles. And we know a myrtle, a hadassah. It's one of the 4 species of Sukkot. So they named her Myrtle. I don't know, depending on your taste, hadassah sounds more Jewish. So that's her Hebrew name. And her Goyish name, her Christian name before there were Christians, is Esther. Now, of course, because she's such a unique biblical figure, her Christian name I'm using again tongue in cheek, but her Babylonian name itself becomes a Jewish name, as this Mordechai, which is also a Goyish name. Mordechai is not a Hebrew name. Mordechai is a Babylonian name. The god of the Babylonians was Marduk, Martuk in modern day English. Marduk, Mordechai, connect those dots. Who names a kid the name of a god? Have you ever heard of a Hispanic person in the United States named Jesus? Okay, Jesus, the name Jesus. You don't meet that many Americans named Jesus. But you certainly among Hispanic Catholics, Jesus, very common name. So it's not that weird that Jews were naming their kids name. As it is, there are Jews who will have named from assimilation. Otherwise, maybe they name their kids Mary. Wait a minute, they're not thinking Mary, mother of Jesus, but that's where Mary starts. If you want to, in Hebrew, it's Miriam. So there's an English name for that, Miriam. Anytime you meet a Jew, and usually you don't meet a Jew named Mary. When you meet a person named Mary, you pretty well can infer it's not a Jew. But every so often you meet a Jew named Mary. What can I tell you? So the gods of Babylonia included Marduk, and Jews were so assimilated that this young boy was named Mordechai when he was born, but he grew up to be a man of the great assembly. And Ishtar, Ishtar, was the female goddess. Ishtar, Esther, connect those dots. So that's her Babylonian Goyish name. And Hadassah is a Hebrew name. And that's why there's a women's organization in the United States, a Zionist group, and they were trying to figure out what should we call ourselves. We could call ourselves Women's Zionist Organization, WZO. And by the way, that's their English names. We could call ourselves whatever. So go and start. Imagine you're the founder of Hadassah, or you're one of the 3 or 4 or 5 insiders, and you got to come up with a name for a women's organization. So what are you going to call it? If you want to use a woman from the Bible, you could call it Sarah. You could call it Rebecca, Leah, Rachel. But those are used by a lot of people. And even Deborah. This word was it's kind of a little exotic at the time. No one really used it. A lot of people in today's morning class, for the first time of learning, it's a Hebrew name. And that's where they came up with it. See, in the old days, American Jewish organizations were led by people who actually knew where to look for Jewish sources. Today, American Jewish organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, he wouldn't know a Bible if it hit him in the head. So Hadassah, that's her Hebrew name. Esther is her Goyish name. She's mostly known as Esther. How come? Well, I taught you already. The Megillah is primarily a book being circulated among 127 provinces, getting past the king's censorship. The king knows her as Esther. What's the king going to call her? If a non-Jewish king, if any non-Jew marries, I don't know, he marries a Jewish girl who was given a Hebrew name at birth but never uses it, or rarely does. So he marries a girl whose name is Mary Kathy, and her Hebrew name is Chumi Rachel. What do you think he's going to call her? So in the same way, King Achashverosh referred to her as Esther. That's her name. He never called her by her Hebrew name. Unfortunately, as with most Jews, go through life, they don't know their Hebrew name. They come to the rabbi. Someone, God forbid, their father, their grandmother died. Rabbi, I need your help to draft the proper thing for the cemetery, for the tombstone. Okay, sure. I'll help you out. What's her Hebrew name? I don't know. You don't know your grandmother's Hebrew name? I don't know. How are we going to find out? And it becomes like Sherlock Holmes. You have to look through old books. You look for a You look for a bris, not for the girl, of course, but you look for old bris papers. You look for membership records from temples. You'd be surprised some of the things I've had to do to find Hebrew names successfully. And it works the other way. Sometimes they know the Hebrew name 30 years earlier when the grandparent died. So it's on the tombstone. And now 30 years later, they need the name for some reason and they can't find it. And I got to find the tombstone. Now they have findagrave.com. Makes it a little bit easier. So there's a debate. What's the relationship? 99% of the rabbis in the Talmud say Mordechai was her uncle. There's a small minority who say in the Gemara that Mordechai was her husband. Most say uncle, and it's built off dode. A dode is an uncle. Ki ein lo ava aim. It is universally agreed she's an orphan. So you've got everything going for her or against her, depending on perspective. Because on the one hand, she's gorgeous. On the second hand, she's really gorgeous. Two separate words, Yafat Toar, Tovat Mara. And she was in an orphanage, would have been completely an orphanage, but Mordechai took custody of her. Some want to say married her. Most say he was an uncle watching out for his niece. Okay, so now the king issues a law. The word dat, remember, means law. In modern day Hebrew, when they talk about the modern Orthodox, in Hebrew, they refer to us as the datiim. Are you religious? Not, what are you? Are you Orthodox, Reform? I'm dati. In Israel, when you say I am dati, that means I'm Orthodox. I follow the law. So dat means law. With an ayin, da'at, it sounds similar because we swallow the middle letter. That means knowledge, no relationship. Unless you want to get like linguistic, it's two different things. And we learned earlier that the king is very law-oriented. He will not do anything unless he is assured that it's in the law and it's permitted by law. So when he wants her killed, for example, Vashti, for not showing and then writing that horrible letter, he consults with people who know civil procedure. People like me, the lawyers of his time, the ones who know procedure. He wants to know under the law, what is the strongest thing I can do to Vashti? And he finds out you have authority to have her executed. Just like the movies that come out that follow Henry II in the Middle Ages. If you've seen Becket, he has Becket executed indirectly. Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? If he does what he does with various queens. And of course, Henry VIII kept his queens very busy on the chopping block. So there's a law, and the law allows him to do it. Okay, he passes the law. As soon as the law is on the books, he kavetz narot rabot el shushan habira. They start gathering the women. And if you look carefully, he gathers, it does not say bitulot. It says ne'arot. He was advised to gather na'ara bitula, virgins, and bring them to Hagar, who's in charge of the virgins. Instead, he decides, if I'm going to do this, I want the prettiest, best I can find in the kingdom, even if she's not a virgin. So he expands the search to Na'arot Rabot, all kinds of young women, many, not many girls, many young women. If it were many girls, it would be Yiladot Rabot. I told you very often the translation is wanting. So he orders that non-virgins be brought also, and they're going to be brought to Haggai, but they're going to end up with a guy named Sha'ashgaz also. All right. And of the ones that are gathered, the one that is prettiest, that's the one. So we're going to do all this stuff. And so we're going to go and we're going to assign special women like makeup artists, cosmeticians. We're going to beautify these women these are going to be makeovers like there's never been a makeover. Think of these network television makeover game shows or contest shows. We're going to do makeovers in every woman. Meantime, back at the ranch, Esther is under orders from Uncle Mordechai. We are going to adopt the majority opinion. He's the uncle. She's not to identify her national, ethnic, religious background. Lo higida Esther et amaviat moladata. She both does not tell her nation, what people does she come from, or what land does she come from. And we're told in the Talmud, well, wouldn't it be a kind of giveaway anyway? Like, let's say someone comes from south of our border into the United States. Again, stay out of the politics here. We're not getting into immigration, legal, illegal immigration. They come from south of the border. Most Hispanics who come to this country, you might not know specifically, are you here from Mexico, Guatemala, or El Salvador, or Haiti, or Ecuador, or whatever else you need to get South America and 3 extra armies and risk, Argentina, Brazil. But by and large, you can tell it's they're Latino. You can tell they're Latino. Or someone's from France and they have the accent, or from Italy, you can pick it up. So it's interesting that there's apparently a sort of neutralist aspect of Esther. She does not have features that are uniquely Jewish or ethnic, nor does she have an ethnic pronunciation. She's, again, if she was named Ishtar, and she's got Uncle Marduk, these are somewhat assimilated people. They may be religious, but it's like yours truly. I have a Brooklyn accent, what can I tell you? But it's nothing like what it was when I came here 30 years ago. But I certainly don't have a Yiddish accent, and I certainly don't have an Israeli accent. I'm from America, and I can put on some Yiddish because I grew up with it around me, but by and large, I'm an American, unless I go out of my way to emphasize that I'm a Jew. So she was able to keep it hidden, and he, Mordechai, kept an eye on her every day, hanging around. It would be like parents sending their kids to freshman year college and not letting them just go off on their own, but like almost moving next to the college or visiting almost every day at the dorm. Now at the dorm, you put a kid in college, at some point the kid wants you to stop visiting. Mom, Dad, but here Esther appreciated it. So as we wrap up for today, because of time, she's getting beautified, and what they're doing. Nowadays, you have deodorants. You can spray or roll on. You have Secret or I don't know, Old Spice or whatever it is that you use or whatever. In those days, they didn't have drugstores quite the same. I'm sure they had apothecaries and you could make stuff. But for this particular purpose, they had the absolute best kind of deodorants and perfumes and the best of the best. And they subjected, if you want to call it subjected, or alternatively, you could say they really just pampered women for 12 months. And what happened was, Kiddat Hanashim, that word dat law, a law was made of Shnei Masar Chodesh, that the women, every woman taken into custody under this royal edict is to be held for 12 months, getting regular treatments of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. Besamim, you know the word besamim from Havdalah. We take out the candle and we take out the sweet smelling spices, the besamim, the sweet smelling spices. Baruch Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam borei minei besamim. So they take betamim and besamim and tamrukei nashim. And with that, when she smells perfect and she looks perfect and it's, baby, you look marvelous, at that moment, she goes and spends a night with the king. Bazeh hana'ara ba'ahamel elamelech. When she's ready, at that moment, she gets called to the king. A kol asher tomar yinaten lalavo imam beit nashim ad beit hamelech. She goes straight for one night with the king. But erev hi ba'ah. That night, as I said, one night only. She spends a night with the king. Uva boker hi shava el beit hashani hanashim sheni el yad ashkaz sri samelech shomer hapilag shim. See how that's put in there very subtly. This is what we're ending with here today. Every woman goes in a virgin, comes out a concubine. Once he has deflowered her virginity, it's like you don't get to be a virgin a second time. It's like you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. You don't get to be a virgin a second time. Not even if your husband's name is Hyman. I don't know where that came from. So anyway, she goes in at night and she comes back in the day. No longer a virgin, she does not go to the house of virgins of Hagar. Instead, there's another concubine, another eunuch, he again Sris, and his name is Sha'ashkaz. And he's in charge of women who are not married and maybe orphans and other women who are just, keep in mind, women in those days did not have an income. You weren't like a lady doctor or a lady lawyer or a lady accountant, or you really didn't have an income. And if you didn't have a father and mother taking care of you financially and you weren't married, you were on the public charge of, and Sha'ashkaz was in charge of you. So Hagar's in charge of the virgins. Sha'ashkaz is in charge of those who are no longer virgins. And after one try, either the king picks you or he doesn't. Lo tavo el hamelech ki im chafetz ba hamelech v'nikra Hashem. You will not get a second chance unless the king asks that you come back, with the understanding being, if after he's tried out 10, 20, 30 women, he remembers one even by name. And that's this thing that he has to remember. It's not just that, what was the name of that redhead again? What was the name of that redhead, you know, with the Marilyn Monroe beauty mark on the, no, he had to remember her name. If he did not remember her name, she's history. And by the way, as we close for the day, she is history. Because since the king was intimate with her, no other man in the kingdom is allowed to be intimate with a woman who has been intimate with the king because of the king's honor. So had he been with every woman in the kingdom, but obviously he wasn't. But for the women with whom he was, so it wasn't such a thing that, oh my God, I'm going to be able tonight to be intimate with the king. Because if he doesn't pick me, it's like in Merchant of Venice, in the Shakespeare play Merchant of Venice, where you have these three men contending for the hand in marriage of Portia. If she doesn't pick you, the deal is you could never marry anybody. And you have to stay unmarried the rest of your life. So same here. What's going to happen when we resume, God willing, next Sunday is it's Esther's turn to come and spend the night with the king. By the way, that's the reason the movie about Esther, I've shown you clips in past years on Megillah, the reason that movie is called The Night with the King, because that's it. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. And if anybody has a comment or a question before